Being an unmated Omega in a world completely dominated by ruthless alphas is a constant, exhausting game of survival. For months, I managed to blend into the shadows, hiding my scent with cheap blockers and pretending to be just another unremarkable beta working a dead-end job. But nature always wins. My heat cycle was approaching fast, and the black market suppressants I'd been relying on completely stopped working this morning. The fever was already creeping into my bones, a terrifying countdown ticking away in my chest. If an uncontrolled alpha caught my scent on the streets, I would be forced into a bond one didn't choose. Out of pure, blind desperation, I made a choice I never thought I'd make. I went to the underground alpha auction. The auction block was hidden deep beneath the city, a dark, damp room smelling of ozone, expensive cologne, and raw fear. Rich omegas and betas sat in plush velvet chairs, casually sipping champagne while bidding millions on elite guards, trained to protect and serve. I sat in the very back row, clutching my small bag of life savings, my heart hammering against my ribs so loudly I was convinced the people in front of me could hear it. I didn't have millions. I just needed someone basic, a quiet, low-rank alpha who would take my money, protect my apartment door for a week while I endured my heat, and then leave without asking questions. Then, the heavy iron chains rattled, and they dragged out the final cage of the night. The auctioneer didn't even smile. He looked disgusted, keeping a safe distance from the bars. Inside the heavy iron enclosure was a towering figure. His clothes were torn, shredded, and covered in dried mud. Thick, rusty chains pinned his wrists tightly to his waist, and a heavy, brutal steel muzzle covered his jaw, forcing his mouth shut. His body was a map of jagged, fierce scars, and his long, tangled dark hair fell forward, completely shadowing his face. He kept his head bowed, sitting motionless on the cold stone floor, looking completely defeated. "Next up is a broken brute," the auctioneer shouted, banging his gavel against the wooden podium. "A wild feral captured in the northern wastes weeks ago. His spirit is entirely crushed. His vocal cords are likely damaged as he hasn't spoken a single word since his capture, and he refuses to use his aura. He is completely useless for high society protection, but he has raw muscle. Opening bid is dirt cheap. Someone take him off our hands." The room remained dead silent. People turned their noses up, whispering about how dangerous, filthy, and ugly he looked. Nobody wanted a broken asset. But looking at him, my inner Omega didn't feel fear. Instead, a strange, overwhelming tug pulled at my chest. It was a bizarre, magnetic sensation, like a string snapping tight between us. I looked down at my shaking hands, then back at the giant in the cage. Before my brain could stop me, my hand shot into the air, holding up my bidding paddle. The auctioneer looked shocked, but with no other buyers in sight, the gavel slammed down. Just like that, using every single coin I had to my name, the scarred, silent monster belonged to me. The journey back to my small, cramped apartment on the edge of the city was agonizingly tense. The auction guards had loaded him into the back of a heavy transport van, still bound in his iron cuffs, though they had removed his muzzle so he could breathe. He didn't move a single inch during the entire 40-minute drive. He kept his eyes locked firmly on the floorboards, his massive frame hunched over to avoid hitting the vehicle's ceiling. Even sitting down, he completely towered over me, casting a massive shadow across the small van. I tried to speak to him a couple of times, offering a quiet, shaky reassurance that I wasn't going to hurt him, but he never looked up. He acted completely submissive, just like the broken, defeated auction wolf everyone claimed he was. When we finally reached my building, the real challenge began. I had to guide him up 3 flights of creaking stairs. He followed meekly behind me, keeping his head down, but his heavy boots made almost no sound at all against the wood, a detail that should have warned me, but I was too distracted by my own failing body to notice. The heavy, sweet, unmistakably potent scent of my oncoming heat was already starting to leak into the air, filling the narrow hallway. My skin was burning, a slick sweat pooling at my collarbone. Time was running out, and my vision was starting to blur around the edges. The moment we stepped inside my apartment, I locked the heavy deadbolt behind us and leaned against the door, breathing heavily, trying to steady my racing heart. The small space instantly felt incredibly crowded, almost suffocating, with his massive presence filling the living room. He stood right by the window, his head still bowed, waiting for orders like a trained servant who expected to be punished. "You're safe here," I whispered, my voice trembling from the heat fever starting to take over my senses. I walked over to him, my small hands shaking violently as I reached up toward the heavy iron locks on his wrists. "I'm not going to hurt you. I don't want a slave. I need your help. My heat is starting, and I need an alpha's presence to help me survive the week. That's all. Once it's over, you can have your freedom. I'll give you money to leave." I lined up the key I'd been given by the guards and turned it. With a loud, heavy metallic click, the iron cuffs unlocked and clattered loudly onto the hardwood floor. The exact moment those cuffs hit the floor, the entire universe seemed to stop. The heavy, suffocating silence in the room broke, but not in the way I expected. The submissive, broken posture of the giant in front of me vanished in the blink of an eye. He didn't stretch his arms, he didn't rub his wrists, and he didn't look relieved. He simply stood up to his full, terrifying height, his shoulders squaring back. The bowed head lifted, and his long dark hair fell away from his face, revealing a sharp, aristocratic jawline and a face that was strikingly handsome despite the jagged scar running across his cheek. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch entirely in my throat. They weren't dull, broken, or empty. They were sharp, piercing, and glowing with an intense, deadly intelligence that made me feel like prey. Before a single gasp could leave my mouth, he closed the distance between us. He moved with a terrifying, supernatural speed that no low-rank alpha could ever possess. Before I could even blink, his massive hand shot out, gripping my waist with an iron hold and pinning me flat against the living room wall. My back hit the plaster with a dull thud. Suddenly, the air in the room became thick, heavy, and impossible to breathe. The weak, suppressed scent he had been hiding exploded outward like a tidal wave, completely obliterating the sweet, vulnerable scent of my heat. A wave of dark cedarwood, stormy rain, and raw lightning flooded the apartment. It was a dominant aura so crushing, so overwhelmingly powerful, that my knees instantly buckled. I would have collapsed to the floor in pure survival instinct if his iron grip wasn't holding me up against the wall. "An Omega buying an Alpha to control?" he growled. His voice wasn't broken or ruined at all. It was a deep, rich, terrifying baritone that vibrated straight through my bones, sending a wave of involuntary shivers down my spine. He leaned down, his face mere inches from mine, a dark, predatory smirk playing on his lips. "You really have no idea what you just brought home, little one. Did you truly believe a pair of cheap auction chains could hold me?" I was simply waiting for the right moment to walk out the front door. As his terrifyingly dominant aura completely crushed my senses, my mind raced through the terrifying rumors I had heard on the news over the past few weeks. The media had been in a total frenzy. The continent's most feared, ruthless pack leader had been betrayed by an inner circle member and captured. The entire world was currently holding its breath, terrified of what would happen when he inevitably broke free and sought revenge. They called him a monster, a shadow king, a tyrant who spared no one. They called him the Supreme Alpha. I looked up into his eyes, which were now glowing a dangerous, vibrant crimson in the dim light of my apartment. My gaze flicked down to his right shoulder, noticing a specific, crest-shaped branding scar hidden under the torn cloth. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my head, and a wave of pure, unadulterated shock washed over me. I hadn't bought a cheap bodyguard to protect my apartment. I had bought him, the most dangerous man alive. My inner wolf instantly whimpered, completely throwing away all its defenses and begging for submission under the weight of his supreme presence. I was trapped in my own home with a god among alphas, and my heat was peaking, making my body ache for his touch even though my brain was screaming at me to run. He noticed the sudden realization dawning on my face, his smirk widening as he tilted his head, leaning into the crook of my neck. His hot breath fanned against my exposed pulse point, right over my unmated, throbbing scent gland. "You bought me at an auction using your last dime," he whispered against my skin, his fingers tightening possessively around my hip, marking my clothes with his heavy scent. "You wanted an alpha to help you through your heat? Well, sweetheart, you got one. But remember this, you unlocked the chains. Which means until I decide I am completely finished with you, you belong to me. Now, let's see how sweet you really smell." I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the worst, fully expecting him to snap my neck or treat me like a piece of property. But instead of a brutal assault, I felt the sudden, shocking warmth of his massive thumb gently brushing away a stray tear that had slipped down my cheek. The crushing, suffocating pressure of his aura suddenly shifted. It didn't disappear, but it transformed from a weapon into a warm, fiercely protective barrier that wrapped entirely around my shivering body, instantly soothing the agonizing friction of my fever. I opened my eyes, trembling, to find him staring down at me with a heavy, intense expression. The predatory smirk was gone, replaced by a raw, primal hunger that was entirely focused on me. "Look at me," he commanded softly, his deep voice rumbling right through my chest. "I am a man of my word. You bought my freedom, even if you didn't know who I was. I do not abuse those who save me. But your heat is turning your blood to fire, little Omega. If I walk out that door right now, your own instinct will drive you mad, and the enemies hunting me will sniff out my scent left on your hands. We are bound together now, whether you like it or not." He leaned in closer, his lips brushing against my ear as my heart thudded wildly against my ribs. "I will give you my scent, my protection, and soothe this fever burning inside you. In return, you keep me hidden in this apartment until my loyal forces track me down. Do we have a deal?" My feverish body didn't even let me think. My fingers gripped the front of his torn shirt, pulling his massive frame closer as a soft, desperate whimper escaped my lips. It was a total surrender. A dark, deeply satisfied growl rumbled in his chest. In one seamless movement, he lifted me effortlessly into his arms, carrying me toward the small bedroom. As he laid me down on the mattress, his towering form casting a shadow over me, his crimson eyes locked onto mine. For the first time in my life, as the Supreme Alpha wrapped his heavily scarred arms around me and let his powerful, intoxicating scent completely overtake my senses, the terrifying fever of my heat began to meld away into pure, blissful relief. When I finally woke up, the blinding, agonizing fever of my heat was completely gone. For the first time in days, my mind felt clear, but my body felt entirely heavy, wrapped securely against a wall of solid, radiating muscle. I opened my eyes slowly, realizing I was completely buried against the Supreme Alpha's chest. One of his massive, heavily scarred arms was draped securely over my waist, pulling me so close against him that there wasn't a single inch of space between us. The scent of cedarwood and lightning was deeply embedded into my skin, completely masking my own Omega scent. He had claimed me, not with a permanent mating bite, but with a temporary protective hold that made my inner wolf feel safer than it ever had in its entire life. I shifted slightly, trying not to wake him, but the moment I moved, his grip tightened, locking me firmly in place. "Stay still," a deep, gravelly voice rumbled above my head. I looked up to see him looking down at me, his eyes no longer glowing crimson, but a calm, piercing dark gray. A faint, rare smile touched his lips. "The fever may have broken, but your body still needs rest. And I am not fond of my property running away." Before I could reply, the sudden, sharp sound of tires screeching echoed from the street below my apartment window. The Alpha's entire body went rigid instantly. In a flash, he was out of bed, moving with that same terrifyingly quiet speed. He approached the window, peering through the blinds. Down on the street, 3 sleek, black luxury SUVs had pulled up, and several heavily armed Alphas wearing tactical gear were stepping out. My heart dropped into my stomach. The underground auction house, or worse, his enemies, had tracked us down. They found us. I panicked, my voice cracking as I scrambled out of the sheets. "We need to go out the back fire escape." "Calm down, little one," he interrupted, his voice completely steady, devoid of any fear. He turned back to me, extending a hand. "Look closer at the crest on their jackets. Those aren't my enemies. Those are my men. The Supreme Pack has finally tracked my beacon." A heavy knock rattled my front door, followed by a deep voice shouting, "Supreme Leader, we have secured the perimeter. Please confirm your safety." The giant looked down at me, his eyes softening just a fraction as he took my small, shaking hand in his massive palm. When I walked onto that auction block, I expected to execute everyone in that room the moment my chains broke. I never expected a brave, foolish little Omega to risk everything to buy me. You saved my life, and you protected me during my most vulnerable state." He walked toward the front door, pulling me gently along behind him. He threw the deadbolt open, revealing a dozen elite soldiers who instantly dropped to one knee, bowing their heads in absolute reverence to their leader. The Supreme Alpha looked out over his men, then turned his gaze back down to me, his grip on my hand tightening possessively. "My time hiding in the shadows is over," he murmured, a dangerous, dark promise in his eyes. "But your time hiding as a defenseless Omega is over too. You belong at my side now. Pack your things, little one. We are going home." The transition from my tiny, drafty apartment to the Supreme Pack's massive, heavily fortified estate felt like stepping into an entirely different reality. But the Supreme Alpha didn't let me hide in the corners. From the moment we arrived, he placed me right by his side, draped in the finest clothes that completely smelled of his protective, dominant scent. No one dared to look down on me. To the entire pack, I wasn't just a random Omega from the slums anymore. I was the person who had brought their king back alive. But before we could truly settle into our new life, there was unfinished business to take care of. The inner circle member who had betrayed him, the one responsible for drugging him, binding him, and throwing him into that horrific underground auction block, was still out there, foolishly believing he was about to inherit the throne. The night of reckoning came swiftly. I stood safely behind the bulletproof glass of the estate's high balcony, watching as his elite soldiers dragged the trembling traitor into the courtyard. The Supreme Alpha walked out to meet him, his towering frame casting a massive, terrifying shadow under the floodlights. The traitor begged, weeping and pleading for mercy, offering excuses for his greed. But the Supreme Alpha didn't offer a single word in return. His eyes flared a brilliant, lethal crimson, and with one effortless, crushing wave of his supreme aura, he forced the traitor straight to his knees, stripping him of his rank and banishing him to the frozen wastes forever. The betrayal was answered, the threat was eliminated, and his absolute rule was restored. With the shadows of the past finally burned away, a peaceful silence settled over the territory. Months later, the temporary protective bond he had given me during my heat grew into something permanent. We stood before the entire pack under a clear, starlit sky, and he formally marked me as his true mate, binding our souls together forever. Sometimes, when we are sitting together by the grand fireplace in his private quarters, away from the meetings and the politics of the pack, I look at the heavy, dark-timbered walls and laugh quietly to myself. I remember the terrifying day I walked into that dark underground auction with nothing but a handful of coins, looking for a simple bodyguard. I look up at the powerful, fiercely protective man holding me tightly against his chest, his fingers gently tracing patterns on my skin. I didn't just survive my heat, I found my home. And side by side, as king and queen of the continent's most powerful pack, we finally had our happily ever after.